So we're in a series right now called How to Human, talking about those pesky people in your life who make things difficult, which sometimes is everybody and sometimes it's just you, right? But here's the deal. I need to give you a little disclaimer before I get going today. If this is your first time here, man, super pumped you're here. You're walking into the middle of a series, so this sermon will stand alone. You're not gonna get lost. But it's a sermon series inside of a sermon series we're doing right now. I'm actually talking about conflict here for 3 weeks, and this is the week 2 of conflict. And so it's a sermon series inside of a sermon series inception is what we're doing right now. There's all kinds of things happening. All right. So the reason I tell you that is because to properly deal with conflict the way God wants you to deal with conflict, you actually kind of need all 3 of these. And it also, if you say, but you forgot to say this, maybe I'll say it next week. How do you know? All 3 of these are important, and this one's kind of the one right in the middle. It's got a lot of meat to it here, so I need to talk fast to try and be able to get us through this. So where I want to start, though, is I want to start in World War I. We're going to go way back, okay? So let's go on a journey. World War I, awful war. I don't know if you're a war buff. It's estimated that 9 million soldiers died in World War I. 9 million. They argue over it because of how many that died. They also kind of argue over the civilian number, and many people believe that the civilian number is close to that. So they believe that almost 20 million people lost their lives in World War I. That is an average of 6,000 people a day, 250 an hour, and a death every 15 seconds for as long as the war was going. Horrible, just a horrible war. They dubbed it the Great War. Some people called it the war to end all wars. That was a hopeful thing, and they were super wrong about that because only 20 years later, a worse one happened. But what I want to do is I want to zoom in on an American soldier during World War I. His name is Henry Gunther. Henry Gunther. Grew up in Baltimore, had a job as a clerk at a bank. He's a good Christian, or good Catholic boy. Didn't sign up. He got drafted. And Henry is among the 9 million casualties in World War I. But he shouldn't be. He shouldn't be. History should have forgotten this guy. We shouldn't know his name. You shouldn't ever think about this guy. You should just disappear into history. But history will never forget Henry Gunther. He died in a small village in France, but it isn't where he died that makes his death one of the most tragic deaths of the war. It's when he died. Henry Gunther died November 11th, 1918, specifically at 10:59. The reason that is significant is because November 11th, 1918, at 11 a.m., the armistice went into effect, ending the war. Henry Gunther died with less than 60 seconds before the war was over. Less than a minute on the clock, and he died. When I read that, that messed me up. Think about the amount of people that came before him, the 9 million men who died before him. You get to right there. I mean, the clock is ticking. It's almost over, and he doesn't make it. And senseless. How senseless of a death is that? The armistice was already signed. It was just a matter of when it was going to go into effect. His death did not change anything. Tragic, again. Now, I was mad for Henry until I learned about the circumstances of his death. So Henry charged a German machine gun nest against the orders of his superior. The way the story goes is he popped off a couple of shots, he fixed his bayonet, and charged these German soldiers. Even the German soldiers, from the accounts of the people there, even the German soldiers were like, oh, no, what are you doing? And he just kept coming, and he just kept coming. And they had no choice but to shoot him. When I read that, I went from being mad for him to being mad at him. What are you doing, man? The war's over. Everybody knew the war was over. Why did you do that? Now, he had some reasons, and I'm not trying to demonize him, but man, come on. And then I flipped my perspective around, and I started thinking about the guy who pulled the trigger, the German soldier. Now, keep in mind, this is World War I, it's not World War II, it wasn't a Nazi, it was just a regular German soldier. I don't want you to think, oh, Adam likes Nazis. No, shut up. This one's online. It was World War I, okay? And I empathize with the guy. Because think about it, he's watching the watch here, tick, 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 tick. He's hoping that this is over, and now you got a guy charging you with the bayonet. And he's like, no, I don't want to do it, no, I don't want to do it, stop, stop, stop. And he kept coming to the point that he had to pull the trigger. That's a dumb way to die and a dumb reason to have to kill, right? Again, no honor in that. The German soldier didn't get anything from that, didn't change anything. Imagine that scene. That's the scene. That's the scene that bothers me, because that's the end of the war. The end of the war is supposed to be a happy thing. Instead, you got Henry Gunther lying on his back, staring up at the French sky, and you have a German soldier looking through the smoke coming out the end of his gun. That's not a good scene. That's not a peaceful scene. So what I want you to know is, sometimes the conflict in your life is going to feel like that. Sometimes the conflict that you have with other people is not going to end the way you want it to end, right? Everybody wants the conflict to end with a big hug and, everything's great and we're better now for having had this conflict and everything's going to be awesome going forward. That's what we want. But sometimes it's not going to be that. Sometimes the conflict's going to feel a whole lot more like this. And by the way, if you look at the way the war ended, if you back up and look at the overall, they signed an armistice. I don't know if you know what an armistice is, but it's not a peace treaty. An armistice is a truce, a temporary agreement to cease military operations, with the understanding that we have to figure some things out. It wasn't peace. They just weren't fighting. And that's kind of the feel of the thing we're going to talk about today. So I want to show you a verse. Before I read the verse, I'm not centered right now. I feel like I'm favoring you guys. I'm sorry, I'm ignoring you. I need to move this way. Is that better? You guys feel better? Good, okay. I want to show you a verse. One of the most important verses on conflict, I think, in the Bible. Short, it's pithy, so it's a good one. Romans 12:18 says this: if possible, so far as depends on you, live at peace with everyone. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. I love it because it's so short, but it's got 3 parts to it, right? This is an easy one if you wanted to memorize a verse. You could memorize this verse. It's really easy. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. There are 3 parts, and each part is important. It doesn't just say live at peace with all men. Isn't that awesome? I'm so grateful that the Bible doesn't put that impossible burden on your shoulders, right? To say that you just have to live at peace with everybody. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. It also says, so far as it depends on you. Now that gives you some responsibility there, right? It does. It's telling you to do everything in your power to be at peace. Don't have a flippant attitude towards conflict in your life. Don't be okay with constantly having turmoil around you all the time. No. So far as it depends on you, be at peace with everybody. So you need to take that, right? That's a responsibility that you need to own. You do whatever you can do to live at peace. But it doesn't just say that either. Those 2 little words right in the beginning of the sentence, so important. If possible. If possible. That is the Apostle Paul who wrote this verse, acknowledging that peace sometimes in your life isn't going to be possible. There's going to be some people where you do everything that you can do. You exhaust it all the way to the end of you. And there's still not peace. It's going to feel like Henry Gunther charging you. Now, Let's be honest about this verse. You look at this verse, I think we all want to focus on different parts of the verse, depending on your personality, right? Some of us in this room, you really look at that if possible part and you kind of bank on that. So in your conflict, maybe in your life, you go real quick to, hey, the Bible says, if possible, I need to live at peace. It's not possible with you, bye. You go there real fast. You get to the end of that thought process really quick and you're just done with people. But others of us in this room, you tend to focus on that middle part, so far as it depends on you, and you so carry the weight of all of the conflict in your life. You take the responsibility that you have, you take their responsibility, you just really feel like, oh, I'm a Christian, I follow Jesus, I shouldn't have this conflict in my life, and you carry that real heavy. But this verse kind of doesn't want to let us lean one way or the other. It forces us to live in the tension of, if possible, so far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. So yes, own what you need to own, do what you need to do, but also acknowledge that sometimes you can't find peace with certain people. So here's the question. How do we live this verse out? It's very short. There are 3 parts to it, but it doesn't give a lot of explanation. So I actually believe that Jesus gives us kind of an outline for how to deal with conflict in our life. He gives it's not exhaustive, but he gives us some direction, some steps to go through. If you're in conflict, Jesus says, here's how to handle this, and he gives you kind of a 1, 2, 3, 4 to go about it. Now, I wish, do you ever wish sometimes when you're like reading the Bible that you could like ask a question, like, don't you just want to like raise your hand and be like, Jesus, could you explain that? I just wish that there's more than just a couple of verses on this. That's why I'm very much saying this is an outline, this is not exhaustive. I wish that verse 15 in Matthew 18 was a whole chapter long and he explained the whole thing. He doesn't. So we have to really dig into what we've got, and we can use some other verses to fill in the blanks. But here's Jesus' process to go through to make sure that you've done Romans 12:18. It starts in Matthew chapter 18, verse 15. This is Jesus speaking. He says, if another believer sins against you, go privately and point out the offense. If the other person listens and confesses it, you have won that person back. Now, if you were here last week, you know we looked at that verse. It's one of the verses we looked at last week. And it's what we said was, if you have an offense, something happens to you, you're hurt by something, if you can't let it go, you got to go, right? That's what this verse says. Hey, if you can't just let this thing go, if you can't just let love cover the offense, if you can't do that and you got something going on inside of you, the responsibility is, hey, go and have this conversation. Go do it. Now, I want to dig a little bit deeper into this verse and some of the verses that follow. Now, there's some things that are implied here in this verse. Implied, it's not explicit, but it's implicit what Jesus is saying here. Did you notice that Jesus said that if you have something going on, if you've got a conflict, that you're supposed to talk to them, not about them? Did you catch that? He did not say to talk about them, he said to go talk to them. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about this later in the series, but I want to touch on this here. No conflict in your life has ever been resolved by talking about someone rather than to them. Do you know that? You've never resolved a conflict with someone by talking about them instead of to them. You've never done it. It's never happened. And I know what you're going to say. I know some of you are thinking it right now. And because I've been a pastor for 12 years and I've had this said to me for 12 years. And I did this first, I start like wagging my head when I'm talking about this because I get all irritated. I'm trying not to be like mean to you if you're thinking this, but I know what you're thinking. Some of you are like, okay, pastor, but sometimes I need some advice on how to deal with this, you know? And you're a valley girl, that's why you talk like that. And that's always the thing that gets said back to me when I say, hey, you need to talk to them, not about them, but I need advice. So, okay, fair enough. Sometimes we do, right? Sometimes a situation is difficult. You want to sift through some feelings. You're wondering, should I be offended about this? Should I? What should I? How should I? All those questions. You're thinking about all that stuff, and you do want to have a conversation with somebody. My question to you is, okay, if you need advice, from how many people? From how many? At what point, when you're talking to a person, another person, another person, another person, another person, at what point does it cross from getting advice to gossip? When does it cross the line? Can we just acknowledge there has to be one, right? If you're asking advice from 30 other people, how many were really necessary? What were you looking for that you didn't get from the first 29, right? And why didn't you just ask them first if they were the smart one? Like, I don't know what you're doing. At what point does it cross a line? Asking for advice is an important thing. I think that's great. But man, how about, can we just limit it? Can you just say you're going to ask advice from one person and then go do it? How about that? That's not in the Bible. Let's just say that's a decent rule of thumb. I don't think you need advice from a ton of people because it crosses over. And then you have to understand there's a cost to that too, right? I mean, if you're a Christian and you're going around telling everybody, I need advice on this, I need advice on this, I need advice on this, you have to know that when you tell someone else about a conflict that you're having, that you've now attached them to the conflict, and what they see the person that you're talking about to them, they're going to have some level of an emotional response to the thing that they heard from you, right? Now their relationship with that person is in some way like shaped by what you said. So it's not no cost. It's a big deal to talk about someone. So let's just limit it. You can get advice, but you got to talk to them, not about them. And I think one of the seductive lies of gossip, specifically when it comes to conflict, is that it feels like you're doing something, like you're accomplishing something. When you tell someone about it, you feel like you're doing something. But really, again, the more you do it, the worse it is for everyone. The rift remains. The war is still going. You haven't solved anything. Don't believe that lie. Talk to them, not about them. Talk to them, not about them. So that's the first thing I see implied in this verse 15. I want to look at something else I think that's implied here. Now, again, I can't raise my hand and be like, Jesus, talk more about this. Like, what's this first step really actually look like, you know? So maybe you had one conversation, you got some advice, this is how I'm going to deal with it. You call the person up, or you're a normal person and you text, because that's what you should do. You should text, not call. We don't need to talk on the phone ever. And then you sit down and you have a face-to-face conversation, right? And you talk to this person. What does that actually look like? I wish I could ask, but Jesus did not give us that in these verses, so we can use some other verses to maybe fill in some blanks. And I want to throw one in here. If you've been a Christian, you've been a church person for a while, you've definitely heard this verse. It's James 1:19. Understand this, my dear brothers and sisters. You must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. I think in this first conversation where you're trying to do some conflict resolution with a person and you're like, okay, I can't let it go, so I got to go. What's that look like? It needs to look like this verse right here. And I love how he starts the sentence. It's like, hey, understand this, my dear brother. It's like he's gathering us together like we're like a first grade class. Like, hey, kids, come here. I got to tell you something, because you get this backwards. And I need to tell you, like, hey, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry, because most of the time I'm slow to listen, quick to speak, and quick to get angry. So he's like, you need to flip that. And that's important. If you want to do this first step right, if you're trying to resolve a conflict, this is like your playbook for that conversation. Quick to listen. Not quick to build an argument, not quick to build some defense, not quick to poke holes in whatever they're about to do. Quick to listen. What if your mentality, so I know some of you just hate this conversation that I'm talking about. I know some of you, this is like your worst nightmare. You stay up at night thinking about, I have to have a conversation with somebody, and that you hate this. So I'm trying to like walk you through this, visualize what this first conversation is going to look like. What if, and some of you are the opposite, you're like, you can't wait to have this conversation, so chill. What if our mentality, going into a conversation like this, whatever mentality was to ask more questions than to make statements? What if you came in and you had that posture, a different kind of posture? Can I give you a suggestion on how to start a sentence? how to start a sentence. You have to finish it, but I think this start to a sentence would be really helpful in the conflict in your life. What if you started a sentence, just 3 words? Help me understand. What if you started sentences like that? Now, your tone of voice is important. Some of you are like, I can do that. Help me understand why you're an idiot. Yeah, not like that, right? Not like that. What if you sincerely asked it? Hey, help me understand. And then, because think about that, those little words kind of actually frame, and again, they put you in a posture, one of learning, because you're asking questions, and you're saying that you genuinely want to know where they're coming from this. It also puts you in the posture of empathy, because you're trying to understand. You want to stand in their shoes. You want to walk around for a bit. You want to know where they're coming from in this conflict, because let's be honest, a lot of times in conflict, I'm very concerned about how I feel, and the pain I'm in, or the anger I'm feeling, and I don't really care what you're feeling. But man, wouldn't it go so much better if we flipped that around? We said, hey, I want to know where you're coming from on this, so help me understand. Help me understand. Because as I dig into listening, if I accept the premise that for the conflict resolution in my life, listening is going to be really important, then I got to kind of examine how I'm doing it. And I think a lot of times, I'll tell you, a lot of times I listen to respond rather than listen to understand. Does anybody want to admit that maybe that's sometimes the way you do that? You go about listening, and you're listening, gathering information, planning your next assault on whatever they're saying, right? You're listening to respond, and you're about to poke holes in everything that they're saying. So you're not trying to understand where they're coming from. You're just preparing your disposition, right? Or your deposition. You're trying to get ready, and you have the posture of like a lawyer, right? Ready to poke holes, ready to tear apart everything they've said. But I think we need to acknowledge that your disposition is going to affect their disposition. Your attitude is going to affect their attitude. So if you're listening like a lawyer, don't you think that might affect the way they speak? Maybe we don't acknowledge that enough, that our attitude coming in actually might affect the conversation. So if you listen only to respond, if you listen like a lawyer, don't you think they're probably going to talk like a defendant? and that's, you could say that, well, they shouldn't do that. Well, maybe you created the very thing you're frustrated with there. But if instead you listen to understand, instead you listen with an empathetic ear, maybe then you would get authenticity instead of defensiveness. And wouldn't that be awesome? If in your conflict, what ended up happening, instead of it feeling like a courtroom battle, what if instead it was an exercise in really getting to know each other, and you're explaining where you're coming from and they're explaining where they're coming from, and then if that was really what was happening, the relationship would actually be better on the other side of conflict than before you even went into it. Listen to understand rather than to respond. So, question for you. What grade would you give yourself as a listener? You good at that? Okay, follow-up question. What grade would the person sitting next to you give you? Or your spouse or your best friend or whoever? Is it the same? Talk later, don't do that now. We don't have time for all that. But think about that. Because again, I think this is really important. When it comes to conflict, I think if you want to say, hey, I want to get good at conflict, I want to do conflict the way God wants me to do conflict, then the skill of being a good listener needs to be high, high, high on your list. You're going to spend an enormous amount of energy listening. Okay, so that's step one. You're going to go and you're going to have a conversation with a person. Now, ideally, that goes well. You say, hey, help me understand. They talk. You say, hey, that hurt my feelings. This is where we're at. I'm so sorry. Will you forgive me? Yes, I forgive you. Great. The relationship is back on firm footing. Everybody has the right expectations. You hug. Boom. Over. Wouldn't that be awesome? Yes, that's what you want every time. However, it doesn't always go that way, does it? Doesn't always go that way. So Jesus gives us further steps to continue if the first conversation doesn't go well. Verse 16. But if you are unsuccessful, take one or two others with you and go back again so that everything you say may be confirmed by 2 or 3 witnesses. So now you're bringing someone else in, right? First step, it was supposed to be privately. It was supposed to be a one-on-one thing. Again, you're trying not to include as many people as possible. You're trying to just deal with this here. But at this point, you're saying, hey, we tried that, didn't work. Now we're going to bring someone else in. So why would you do that? Why the witnesses? You bring in a posse. You're bringing a team of counselors here to keep track of everything they're saying. You're bringing a gang to this fight. What's your mentality? Hopefully none of those things. See, because what it should be, I think this shows the genius of Jesus, because he knows that sometimes when you're in a conflict with another person, that it's really hard to not let the heat from the conflict or the emotion from the conflict or like that fog of war that kind of happens just gets in the way. So sometimes you need a third party to come in who can kind of sift through some of this stuff. Maybe say, hey, so you're saying this, but I think they're hearing this, so maybe we need to adjust the way we're doing this. And maybe they can help drain some of the heat so you can actually communicate and actually work through something. Sometimes you need to bring someone else in, an objective third party. Ideally, they would know both of you and love both of you. And they could help keep things civil so that communication could happen. And that's a good thing. If you've tried to have one-on-one conversations and you maybe feel like the conflict isn't helping, like you're not getting anywhere, like maybe the conflict is so unhealthy that damage happens during the conflict, that it's not even about the thing that started the conflict. Now it's about what happened during the conflict. And then you just kind of keep dominoing into the next conflict and you can't seem to get anywhere. Maybe that's the point where you do need to bring somebody else in and have conversations with a third party. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing, to bring someone in to help work through these things. So maybe you're hitting that point. Maybe conflict is still raging with someone. Maybe it's smoldering beneath the surface and you know something might explode. Maybe this is the point where you're going to sit here and maybe you're going to make the decision, say, hey, we need to bring somebody into this because this isn't happening the way it's supposed to happen. So that's step 2. Step 1, one-on-one. Step 2, you bring in some witnesses so that every word can be confirmed. Sometimes that doesn't work. And the conflict's still going. You're still at odds. And Henry Gunther is still charging you with his bayonet. And you're saying, stop, stop, and it's still coming. If you get to this point, Jesus gives another step in the beginning of verse 17. If the person still refuses to listen, take your case to the church. Now, that requires some contextualization for us, right? So, maybe you're sitting here and you're like, what does that even mean? Because here this is church, right? We're having it right now. What did Jesus mean? Did he mean that right now you should stand up and tell us what's going on with your conflict? Would you like to share the details of the fight that you've been having for months with your spouse? Would you like to do that? I'm sorry, don't. Please don't do that. That would be awful. What does he mean? Take it to the church. Now, when Jesus said this, he was talking to his disciples. Jesus was still walking the earth. Church, as we know it like this, didn't exist yet. So he says church. The Greek word is ekklesia. It means assembly, gathering, group of people. So what is this group of people? What is he talking about here? In our day and age, I think you can view church kind of one of two ways. You can either go to a church or be a part of a church. And I'm not going to dunk on either one. They just are, right? So maybe you go to a church. And I would say if you go to a church, maybe you watch online occasionally. Maybe you come, you enjoy the music, you hear the preaching, and then you're out. And you don't have a ton of deeper relationships. You go to the church. And again, I'm not going to dunk on that. I think spiritual growth can come from that. I'm not against that at all. But then there's another thing that I would call being a part of a church, and that's where you have a little bit more of a depth of relationship with at least a smaller group of people in a church like ours. And I would almost want to use the word like they're your spiritual tribe. Like they're your people, man. They're like your people. They got your back spiritually. You're walking shoulder to shoulder towards Jesus, following Jesus together, and they're those kind of people in your life. If you're a part of a church, this makes a little more sense. If you just go to a church, this might sound a little funny. Like, why would I bring my mess to a bunch of people that I don't know very well? Well, maybe that's not what Jesus meant here. This is supposed to be a benefit of being a part of a spiritual tribe with people who really, really care about you. Because what this is, man, when you get to this point, and you're like, man, I've tried this and I've tried that, and I've had some conversations, I've brought in some people, and it's just not happening. You hear this step, you're trying to activate the collective spiritual muscle of your tribe. Here's my nerd reference. You're lighting the beacons of Gondor here. When it comes to the relationship, you are calling for aid. You need your spiritual people to come in, because then, hey, and what you want in this is you want to be able to tell people who, when they say, hey, I'm praying for you, they really actually do it. You know, like those people you really know, not just saying on Facebook, like thoughts and prayers. Like, no. You got a real tribe of people who are going to send texts, who are going to make phone calls, are going to again, you're calling on the collective spiritual muscle of a group of people to try and bring about reconciliation in a place that it hasn't been brought. There's supposed to be like a spiritual weight behind this. We're pushing back darkness together, and it's supposed to be a good thing for a group of people to be able to do that. It's a benefit of being a part of a spiritual tribe. Now, there's a feel to that. Some of you have been a part of a church is where this has happened, and it had the wrong feel collectively. Like it felt like you told the church what was going on, and all of a sudden it felt like you were in a courtroom being judged by everybody. And that's not what it's supposed to feel like. It's supposed to feel like a hospital where you come in and you say, hey, I'm bleeding, the relationship's bleeding, and we're supposed to come alongside you and try to help you through that. That's the feel. That's the feel. Not judgy, trying to help, do whatever we can spiritually to play that role. Again, it's supposed to be a good thing. Now, look how far we've come. You started knowing that you needed to go have that conversation. I can't let it go, I gotta go. You had the one-on-one conversation. Maybe you had multiple one-on-one conversations. Again, this is an outline. Jesus doesn't mean you have one conversation. How long? He didn't say, 45 minutes is all I got. Sorry. Like, no, this will be, I believe the deeper the relationship you have, the longer this process is gonna be. So maybe you have multiple one-on-one conversations. It doesn't work. Okay, now we need to bring in a third party. And maybe you have more than one of those. And then you get to the point where you're like, I got to call in my spiritual backup here. And the weight of the church comes, and they try to pray, and they try to influence, and they try to bring this reconciliation. This whole process is designed to bring reconciliation and just restoration to the relationship. Everything's designed to push this back together. So you've done all this stuff, a one-on-one conversation, you bring in the third party, you go to the spiritual tribe for help, you've done all of this. If nothing can heal the rift, if Henry Gunther is still charging with his bayonet, and you're waving him off with 1 minute left in the war, you drop down to the last part of verse 17. Then if he or she won't accept the church's decision, treat that person as a pagan or a corrupt tax collector. So you get to the end, you've done everything you can, you've exhausted this process, and even the weight of your spiritual tribe did not convince the person to move towards reconciliation. It says to treat him like a pagan and a corrupt tax collector. If you've never, if you're not familiar with the Bible, you're like, what in the world does that mean? Well, that means that the relationship as you knew it is over. It's over. You're going to push away to protect yourself. This is an armistice. This is not peace. There's no more fighting, but there's a separation that's going to happen. And by the way, how did Jesus treat pagans and corrupt tax collectors? Church. I hate it when people act like that means you're like going to be mean or something. Like, Jesus loved those people fiercely. He prayed for them to turn back to him. He prayed for their repentance, for their hearts. That's still going to be your posture. You never let go of that. But there's a pushing away. This is where the idea of boundaries comes in. If you ever heard of Boundaries before, it's a really good book. You should read it if you've got some difficult relationships in your life. But say this is you, your personhood. There's a gate through which people are allowed to interact with you, the appropriate way of interaction with you. But some people insist on coming in on the sides and interacting with you in ways that are not okay. And in that case, you put the walls up. There's still a gate. Hey, we can interact, but this is how we're going to have these conversations. This is the kind of relationship we're going to have. And if they come in on the side, they hit the wall. This part of the process, this part sucks. Some of you have relationships. You've done all this. You've gotten to the point where you had to push away from someone. This sucks. This is the worst way for a conflict to end. This is the relational equivalent of Henry Gunther dying on the French countryside while a German soldier looks through that wisp of smoke. This is the worst way to end. The worst way. You should hate this. There's no part of you that should enjoy having to push away from people in your life. Christians, this should be super rare. Super rare. And I also want to say that if you grew up in church, you're familiar with this process. I think sometimes Christians, we want to go through the process to say that we did, and we kind of check the boxes. I talked to him, I brought somebody, I told my pastor, and now I'm done. Like if you do it like that, like cold, it's not going to work. And I just don't even think that matters. Why would you do it that way? You clearly already want to be done with the person. You just want to say that you did it the right way. But if your heart's off. So can I show you, what I think is supposed to be like a mark of a true follower of Jesus. There's something that's supposed to be a distinctive about us that's different than the rest of the world. Our distinctive, one of them, is that we, Christians, are supposed to treat people better than they deserve. Do you know that? That's a part of what we are supposed to be and do. We're supposed to treat people better than they deserve. That means we're supposed to have more patience than they deserve with them. That means we're supposed to put up with a little bit more than they deserve. We're supposed to be kinder than they deserve. We're supposed to treat people better than they deserve. And where I get this is John 13:34. Jesus speaking. He says, "So now I'm giving you a new commandment. Love each other just as I have loved you. So you should love each other." That is a self-sacrificing, not give people what they deserve kind of a love, is it not? That's what you're supposed to extend to people because it was extended to you. Jesus loved you in a way that you did not deserve. He gave to you things that you did not deserve, and now you're supposed to continue that on. That love is supposed to flow through you to others. That should flavor this whole process. I'm going to treat people better than they deserve. I'm going to love people like Jesus loved me. You still go through the process, but you keep this as the flavor of every step. So we're taking communion today. Hopefully you got a cup on the way in. I think this is kind of a perfect reminder to us of the kind of love that Jesus had for us. If you didn't get a little communion cup, just raise your hand. We got some people come around and give you one. And just a little thing so that you know, there is a cracker in the top part and then there's juice in the bottom. If you're confused, you're like, I only have the juice. The cracker's there. It's there. So if you've never taken communion before, let me explain it briefly. The night Jesus was arrested, he sat down with his disciples and he had some bread and he broke it and he said, hey, this is my body, which is broken for you. And then they had some wine and they drank the wine and he said, this is my blood, which is spilled for you. And Jesus said that we were supposed to do this thing, this physical reminder of a spiritual truth, that when we would take communion, we would eat a little cracker and drink some juice, that we would remember what Jesus did for us. And he promised to kind of be here in a special way in that. So what we're going to do is the worship team's going to play a song, and I want you to take a minute spiritually, and I want you, you can take it whenever you're ready during the song, but I want you to take a minute. I want you to pray. Maybe this is a moment where you confess some things to God, you ask for forgiveness, you get right with him. Maybe this is a moment where God's nudging you about a conversation you need to have or a next step that you need to take. Maybe this is a moment where you just kind of pour out some pain that you have in relationships because you have some people who you made it all the way through this process and there's deep wounds from that. But take a minute with Jesus, and when you're ready, take communion. Pray with me. God, this is hard. Relationships are hard, Lord. I pray for the person right now, Lord, who is hurting because they have relationships that they've had to push away from to protect themselves. I pray for them right now, Lord, that they would feel your presence in that pain. That they would know that you love them fiercely, no matter how messy that feels. I pray for the person right now who doesn't want to have the conversation, doesn't want to take that next step, or doesn't even know how, Lord. I pray that you would be with them too, give them the wisdom, the boldness to be able to move forward, Lord. I pray that you would give all of us a sense of the importance of working through these things, Lord. That we would love others the way you loved us, that we would treat people better than they deserve, that would be the flavor of all of this. And I help this to be a church that is a safe place, that this would be a spiritual tribe who has the feel of coming into a hospital and getting care for these things, not some judgy place. Pray that we would have that right temperature with this, Lord. Thank you for what you did on the cross. Thank you for your love and forgiveness. Thank you for treating us better than we deserve. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.